Chapter 11 Last Normal Day. He called in sick on a Sunday, which didn't make sense logistically, and he did it anyway. He lay in bed at 6:15 with the alarm not yet gone off and lumpy a warm pressure against his legs, and the apartment around him doing its quiet Sunday thing, the light different on Sundays, slower, the street below less purposeful, and he made the decision before he'd examined it. He reached over and turned the alarm off before it sounded. He put the phone down. He lay there. Lumpy adjusted his position without waking. Henry looked at the ceiling. He tried to remember the last time he'd taken a day. Not a sick day, he was never sick or hadn't been in recent memory, but a day that belonged entirely to the fact of being alive in it. He couldn't remember one. There had been days off technically, but days off had a way of filling themselves with the maintenance of a life, laundry, groceries, the small administrative tasks of existing, until the offness of them had been entirely used up. He'd never been good at the other kind. The unstructured kind. His ex-wife had said he treated leisure like a problem to be solved. He was going to try the other kind today. He was going to try it because he'd read a document in a break room and heard two units talking without sound through a reinforced window and listened to a woman he respected tell him to lock his door. And because those things had been accumulating in him for weeks, and the accumulation had reached a point where he needed a day that was only what it was. Just a day. He made coffee slowly. That was the first thing. He made it the slow way, the pour-over method. He'd bought the equipment for 2 years ago and used maybe 4 times because the pour-over method required standing there attending to it, water in slow circles, watching the bloom, and he was usually in a hurry to be somewhere he wasn't sure mattered. He stood at the counter and poured the water in slow circles and watched the bloom and was nowhere else. Lumpy appeared and sat in the middle of the kitchen floor and watched him with the evaluation of a cat, assessing whether this new behavior was going to be relevant to his interests. "It's the same coffee," Henry told him. Lumpy reserved judgment. After coffee, he went to the seashell shelf. He did this sometimes, stood in front of it with his coffee and just looked, but usually there was something else happening, the news running in the background or his jacket already on and the looking just a pause on the way to somewhere else. Today there was nowhere else. He stood in front of the shelf in his pajamas with his slow coffee and looked at them properly. 23 shells, he knew each one. The lightning whelk on the far left, found when he was 12, the one that started it. He could still feel the weight of it in his younger hand if he tried, the way it had been too big for his palm and he'd had to cup both hands to hold it properly, standing at the water's edge with the wave pulling back from his feet. His mother had asked him to leave it, but he'd put it in his pocket. It had ridden home in his lap on the back seat of the car. He could feel the ridges of it through his jeans. He picked it up. He held it in his adult hand, which was large enough now that it fit easily, and felt the difference between that and the child hand that had first held it. He set it down carefully. The others he looked at without touching, the cowrie with the glazed underside, the 2 augers nearly identical standing upright because he'd never been able to lay them on their sides without feeling like something was wrong with that. The moon snail, the turkey wing bivalve still hinged, the ones in between. He'd carried these things through his divorce and his move and the 14 months of this apartment. He'd carried them through the factory and the units and the document and the locked door. They'd been on the shelf in their same positions while all of that happened, and they were here now, unchanged, the oldest things in his life by a long distance. He finished his coffee looking at them. He was arranging them, a thing he did sometimes, a small permitted restlessness, moving them slightly without changing the order, just resetting them in their positions with fresh attention, when Mrs. Calloway knocked. 3 fast, 1 slow. She was at the door with a pot and an expression that suggested she'd been planning this before she knocked. "Soup," she said, "don't argue." "I wasn't going to." "You were about to be polite about it, which is the same thing." She came in. Lumpy appeared. She stepped around him with the ease of long practice. She stayed. This time it didn't feel new. It felt like what had always been going to happen on a Sunday when both of them had nowhere to be. She put the soup on, and he found bread, and they ate at the kitchen table in the Sunday light and talked about her garden project, which had encountered opposition from a member of the Landlord Association named Gerald, who she described with a precision of disdain that made Henry laugh twice. "He cited a bylaw," she said, "a bylaw, Henry, about permissible ground cover." "Is there a bylaw?" "There is a bylaw. He found it." She broke bread with the energy of a woman who had considered the situation fully. But I looked it up and it applies to ground cover in shared vehicle areas. My garden is not a vehicle area. Have you told Gerald that? I have told Gerald that in writing with the relevant section highlighted. She looked pleased. Gerald has not responded. Gerald is regrouping. Gerald is welcome to regroup. She lifted her soup spoon. The garden is happening. Henry smiled at his bread. It came easily, the smile, it fit. After lunch, they ended up on the couch the way they'd ended up on the couch before, with the easiness of a second time, Lumpy between them conducting his affairs. Outside, the Sunday afternoon was doing its late things, the light going golden and then softer, the street quiet, the specific piece of an afternoon that had been used well. Mrs. Calloway found something on the television. An old film, black and white, the kind where everyone spoke in that clipped mid-century way that Henry usually found alienating. But she was already settled, and Lumpy had reorganized himself across both their laps in a way that made movement impractical, and so Henry watched. It was a good film, as it turned out. He lost himself in it, which he hadn't done with a film in a long time. The story was simple, a man trying to return to something he'd lost, and there was a scene in the middle where the man stood outside a house he'd once lived in and didn't go in, just stood there on the street looking at the lit windows, and Henry felt something in his chest that he didn't examine. Lumpy purred between them. At some point Mrs. Calloway's shoulder was against his. He didn't move away and she didn't move away, and the film continued and the afternoon light changed in the room, and Henry thought, this. Whatever the word was for this exact configuration of warmth and quiet, and the film and the cat and the light and the woman beside him. This. He didn't say it, he let it be what it was. The film ended. Mrs. Calloway made a sound of satisfaction, not the loud kind, a small private one, the sound of someone who'd been right about something. She reached for the remote to turn the television off, and that was when the broadcast cut in. Not the news program, not the measured, careful anchor with the register Henry had learned to recognize. Something else, the emergency override, the one that commandeered the signal, the one that Henry had seen twice in his lifetime before this, and both times had made his stomach do something before his brain had caught up to what he was seeing. A man in military dress stood at a podium. Not a press conference setup, a room Henry didn't recognize, institutional, functional. Behind the man, a flag. The man's face was the face of someone who had been awake for a long time and had decided to stop looking like it. He spoke for 45 seconds, Henry counted. The substance of it was that a military installation, he named it, a base Henry didn't know, somewhere in the Midwest, had experienced what he called an asterisk autonomous operational deviation involving deployed units. That the situation was asterisk contained and under active management. That there was asterisk no threat to civilian populations at this time. He used the phrase asterisk at this time twice. He took no questions. The broadcast cut back to the film for one surreal second, the closing credits, someone's name scrolling upward, and then the news program came on and the anchor was already talking. Henry turned it off. The room was very quiet. Lumpy had stopped purring. He sat up between them and looked at the dark television screen with the focused attention of an animal that had felt something change in the air. Mrs. Calloway sat with her hands in her lap, not moving, not speaking. Henry looked at the side of her face and saw the same expression she'd worn the night of the battalion deployment footage, the expression older than fear, the one that knew. "Patricia," he said. She turned and looked at him. He didn't know what he'd been going to say. In the silence where the words should have been, she reached over and took his hand, not the way she'd touched his arm before, briefly, incidentally, but deliberately. Her hand around his, the warm, specific fact of it. They sat like that for a moment. Lumpy looked at the dark screen. Outside, the Sunday afternoon continued, golden and ordinary and entirely indifferent to the man at the podium and his 45 seconds and his phrase at this time. "You should eat the rest of the soup," Mrs. Calloway said finally. Her voice was steady. "Don't let it go to waste." Henry looked at her hand around his. "Okay," he said. She let go. She stood. She smoothed her clothes with the practicality of a woman who had decided what the next few minutes were going to be. She went to the kitchen. Henry sat on the couch alone for a moment. Lumpy climbed into his lap and stood there, which he rarely did, stood rather than settled, 4 feet on Henry's thighs, looking at his face with the amber patience of a creature conducting an assessment. Henry put his hand on Lumpy's back. "I know," he said quietly, to the cat and to no one and to himself. He got up, he went to the kitchen, he ate the rest of the soup.